I'm Bonnie Glaser, Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to the China Global Podcast. The Global South is a term that covers a broad swath of developing countries and emerging economies in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. It's a grouping of over 130 heterogeneous countries that is pushing to enhance its voice in global decision-making. China, which self-identifies as a leader of the developing world, has a long history of engaging with the Global South. Under Xi Jinping, Beijing has deepened its ties with Global South countries through economic investment, diplomatic engagement, and security cooperation. Meanwhile, developed countries from the wealthier and more industrialized Global North are stepping up efforts to counter Chinese influence and win support from Global South countries. What are China's interests in the Global South? What are the key strategies and tactics that Beijing utilizes to influence and engage with those countries? And how have countries in the Global South responded to China's influence? How will intensified Sino-American rivalry impact developing countries in the future? To discuss these issues, I'm pleased to welcome as my guest today, Mr. Masaaki Yatsuzuka, Senior Research Fellow at the China Division of the Regional Studies Department at the National Institute for Defense Studies in Japan, known as NIDS. He's the co-author of a recently published report titled The Rising Global South and China. Welcome to the China Global Podcast, Masaaki.
Thank you, Bonnie-san, for having me.
So tell us, why is there resurgent interest in the Global South? And what are some of the key factors that have led to renewed focus on developing countries?
China's leaders had never talked about the Global South before, but they started to focus on it in the summer of 2023 at a meeting of the BRICS group. Xi Jinping said that China is a member of the Global South, and he also said that China wants to make the voice of the Global South louder and to change the unfair international governance. I think there are a few reasons why China's leaders have stated focusing on the Global South recently. First, the Global South is growing its economy, becoming an important supplier and market for China. As the global economy becomes more interconnected, developing countries are becoming essential to the global supply chain. Also, the emerging economies are a growing market for China's commodity goods and infrastructure. China's been facing the issue of the oversupply capacity, so as BRI initiatives has been launched. And second, countries in the Global South have distinct views in international relations. Even during the time of great power competition, during the Ukraine war, most countries in the Global South supported the UN General Assembly resolution that condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine. However, many countries in the Global South also did not support the economic sanction led by the Western countries. This shows that Global South countries are independent, and may not always agree with the Western countries. China's leaders likely understand how these Global South could have impact in the era of US-China great power competition. The Global South is a developing world which includes 135 countries and 84% of the world population. These countries make up the majority of the world's population and in UN. It makes sense for China to recognize the importance of Global South as the US-China conflict intensifies.
So you've already begun to address my next question, or maybe I can draw you out a little bit more. What really are China's interests in engaging with this set of developing countries? Are these interests the same today as they were in the past?
There are consistency and change in China's engagement with the Global South. During the Cold War, China supported various movements in the Global South, like the non-alignment movement, the New Economic International Order, and so on. By supporting these movements, China wanted to show that it was on the side of the developing world. This would improve China's position in international relations, especially with the major powers. So China has consistently used the global south for geopolitical reasons. This is still happening even now in the era of US-China great power competition. However, as China has become a major economic power, its motivation to engage with the global south has changed slightly, I think. After Jiang Zemin's administration promoted China's go-out policy, China has expanded its foreign interests in different regions. Foreign interests include China's nationals, companies, and vested interests such as mineral resources and port construction. However, there was turmoil in the Arab Spring, particularly the civil war in Libya in 2011. The war put China's interests in the Middle East at risk. The Chinese government sent the PLA to quickly evacuate Chinese citizens from the Middle East because of the civil war there. This showed the Chinese government how dangerous instability in the region could be for China's foreign interests. Because of this, China started working more with the global south in the political and military areas. So, in other words, China's growing foreign interests in the global south has encouraged China to play a more active role in politics and military matters.
So, if we focus on the economic tools and mechanisms that China uses, what are the main ways that they're using their economic clout to exert their influence in global South countries?
China's economic aid and investments have a significant impact on diplomatic behavior of the global South countries. For example, China's aid influences how developing countries vote at the United Nations General Assembly and other international meetings. Sometimes, China and the global South countries work together at the United Nations through the G77 Plus China Group. For example, in elections for the Secretariat of the United Nations Specialized Agencies, China used its aid to encourage other developing countries to choose China's candidates instead of candidates from other countries in G77 group. In addition, China might also use its economic power to pressure developing countries. It is supposed to that China's economic pressure is more effective on developing countries than on developed countries. Countries that trade with China a lot are likely to follow China's lead because they are afraid of losing investment and economic assistance from China. For example, small countries with limited resources can be greatly impacted by China's investment, even without directly pressuring them. China can influence a country's diplomatic choices by making suggestions. For example, it is supposed that shift of Kiribati in the Pacific area, diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China, was affected by China's strong economic influence in the fishing industry.
So, in the security realm, we've seen a lot of emphasis, I think, in Chinese policies in recent years. Of course, the first overseas military base was established in Djibouti some time ago. We've recently seen what most people think are another base in Cambodia. And I noted that in the Pentagon's latest China military power report, the list of countries that the PRC now is said to be considering building what they call military logistics facilities is now expanded to 20 other developing countries. I believe in the prior China military power report, it was like 17. But of course, we don't know how many of those will actually be built. So, what are China's motivations and objectives in expanding its military access and its presence in the global South? And maybe you can give some examples of that.
As I said, in order to protect its foreign interests in the global South, China tried to increase its influence in the military arena. A survey by the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University found that 75% of Chinese people support building more military bases in other countries to ensure China's nationals and interests. And researchers in China also say that the country needs to be able to project its military power more easily to protect its interests in other countries. They called for more active participation in port building in the Pacific area. Given the public opinion supporting further military engagement with the Global South, it is likely that China will seek more overseas military bases. There have been reports of the China's military building new bases in UAE and Oman, where China is increasing its influence. On the other hand, the country hosting the base can't depend entirely on China's military engagement, in fact. They need to find a balance with other major powers. For example, the Liam Naval Base in Cambodia, ULACE, is undergoing expansion with Chinese support. Interestingly, it is reported country that the Cambodian government has expressed a desire to have a ship from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force call at the base as the first port call. The US is concerned about China's growing influence in Cambodia, and Cambodian government seems to be striking a balance by allowing Japanese Self-Defense Force vessels. The key point is China's military involvement is different from that of the United States. China avoids military alliance that would obligate China to defend other countries. So in other words, China does not provide the same level of security to other countries as the United States does. For now, there are no signs that will change. The Global South accepts China's military involvement, but does not fully rely on China. So even in the Middle East and Africa, it is recognized that the United States is much more important in terms of military involvement.
So, Masaaki, you said earlier that there's 135 countries in the Global South. So my next question is going to be a little bit difficult to answer, but I'm sure that the views across these countries of China probably varies tremendously. But maybe you can characterize a bit how countries, in the Global South do perceive China, how they're responding to Chinese influence. And I'm particularly interested in whether there's a major difference in many countries between the views of China held by the governments and by the general public.
It depends on the country in the case by case. But in general, I think that depends on whether China's lies is in international relations or within its own country. Many Global South countries welcome China's expanded presence in international politics. First, they have experienced historical Western colonial rule and are also frustrated by the double standards of Western nations, even in current international situation. From this perspective, they generally welcome the multipolarity that China's rise will bring. They tend to care more about growing their economic development than about having democratic governance and protecting human rights. They also think the international order created by Western countries is unfair for the Global South. Therefore, they support China's slogan of democratization of international relations and reforming an unfair global economic system. On the other hand, they are cautious of China's growing influence in their own countries. Developing countries want Chinese aid and investment, of course, but many in the Global South also have economic relations with other Western countries. Therefore, focusing only on strengthening our relations with China could be risky. In addition, while China's investment creates jobs and convenience, but it can also lead to various social issues, including financial debt, labor, and economic problems. I think they are worried about China's growing influence in their country and are trying to balance things.
So, from your perspective, why does China's growing influence in the global South matter? So many countries, including Japan, the United States, Europe, have been increasingly concerned about China making inroads in the developing world. So, what does this deepening Chinese involvement with developing countries imply for the existing international order? Is this something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, importantly, China's clear showing its attitude to challenge the existing international order by rallying the global south. China has various international initiatives that primarily target the global south, such as GSI, GDI, and GCI, and so forth. They strongly reflect anti-Western values. Through these international initiatives, China aims to seize discourse power in international relations. Firstly, China clearly denied the US military alliance network as a Cold War mentality and actively highlight its advantages for stability and peace. And second, China seeks to relativize universal values such as democracy, freedom, and human rights by emphasizing the diversity of economic development and diversity of political system. In addition, China's economic assistance will disregarded the value of democracy and human rights is likely to contribute to the survival of authoritarian states. My report points out a correlation. The more authoritarian a state, the higher favorable view for China. This has important implications for international relations at a time when democracy is in decline. From China's perspective, cooperation with the global south is seen as contributory to achieving China's vision of the international order, namely the major transformation unseen in a century, promotes multipolarity and the international trend of the declining West and rising East, which includes China and the developing countries.
So, from the perspective of the global South, how has the intensifying US China competition affected their interests? And again, I'm sure there's quite a diversity in how their interests have been affected. How are countries responding to the growing US rivalry? And are you seeing predominantly positive impact or negative impact?
There are opportunities and risks, of course. Let me start with the opportunities. The global south can increase its own presence by playing the Chinese card and US card. A country in the global south can attract the attention of both the US and China. Indeed, US engagement tends to be stronger in regions where China's influence has increased. On the other hand, if a country in the global south joins the anti-US united front that China is forming, it risks being cut off from US security and assistance. So, it has to have relations with both sides and strike a balance. And some studies have shown, interestingly, countries in the global south enhance their national interests by keeping neutrality even when decoupling becomes severe.
So there are other rising powers that are challenging China's bid for leadership in the global south, and particularly India and Brazil come to mind. So, and we see this playing out in the BRICS, for example. So, how is Beijing dealing with those challenges?
Yeah, it's a new phenomenon. And the balance of power within the global south is changing, which could shake China's leadership. In the past, China was the center of emerging market, but countries with the demographic dividend, such as India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and Nigeria, now have growth potential. China's leaders are concerned that emerging countries could challenge China's leadership in the global south. For example, India hosted the Voice of Global South Summit in January 2023, but India did not invite China's leader. in it. I think that this shocked the Chinese leadership because then the Chinese leadership began to refer the global south. It may indicate China's effort to control the discourse of the global south and the expansion of BRICS membership currently to include countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, and Indonesia. These countries are very close to China. It may be an attempt to reduce the presence of emerging powers such as Brazil and India.
I wanted to ask you about your own country's perspective on China's influence on the global South, and how concerned is Japan about what China's doing in developing countries, and then what is Tokyo doing to counter Chinese influence? Is it working largely with other countries in order to counter China's influence, or is it working unilaterally? Whatever perspectives you can provide would be interesting.
From Japanese perspective, it is concerned that China is trying to legitimize its attempt to change the status quo in East Asia by showing up the global South support for China's narrative. Some regions like the Middle East and Africa tend to support China's view without knowing current security situation in East Asia. It may lead to intensify China's attempt to change status quo through military coercion in South China Sea, East China Sea, and Taiwan Straits. Because of this, government of Japan has tried to work more with countries in the global south. For example, Prime Minister Kishida invited key global south countries to the Hiroshima G7 summit in July 2023. Leaders discussed common agendas and challenges and ways to strengthen relationship between developed countries and the global south. And government of Japan also launched Freedom and Open Indo-Pacific strategy to provide the capacity building with the global south countries and to enhance its the reputation in the global south. So I suppose that the Japanese government is also currently still working to share its security concerns with many countries in the global south globally.
The United States has had, I think, several mechanisms that it has used to try and increase its investment and encourage the private sector also to invest capital in developing countries. I think the latest one is PGII, which I think is Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. And of course, in the European Union, we have the Global Gateway. What is China's response to this increased attention that's being paid to developing countries by the US, by Japan, by other allies and partners? Is it concerned, and does China have a strategy to avoid losing influence?
I found some the researchers in China alarmed that the US and its allies and partners are reaching out to countries in the global south in order to weaken the global south solidarity and spread the narrative of the Chinese threat and strengthen the leadership of rival countries such as India and Brazil. In response, China is trying to strengthen the momentum of the global south. The expansion of the BRICS is likely to be part of this effort, I think. And in addition, China has involved in major international conflicts. On the issue of Palestine, China has taken a different stance than the Western countries. The Chinese government may be trying to strengthen unity among the global south by taking a pro-Palestinian stance, gaining support from the Arab countries, and clarifying its differences with the US and its allies. This is China's effort in currently.
So finally, I wanted to ask you about China's reaction to the Trump administration. We're only 3 weeks into the Trump administration, and we know that on the very first day of Trump in office, that He basically tried to shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development, and that's the primary federal agency responsible for providing foreign aid to developing countries. Just the other day, it was declared that all of the people who work for USAID that are deployed around the globe within the next 30 days have to, wrap up their jobs and come back. And even the letters of the U.S. Agency for International Development on the building have now been erased. The optics are, I think, signaling that the United States will be less involved in giving such aid to global South countries. So how do you think Beijing will respond to this? How do you think this will affect the U.S.-China strategic competition in the global South?
I suppose freezing U.S. aid may create new opportunities for China to strengthen its relationship with countries in the global South and enhance its reputation among them. This could be seen as a sign by global South countries that the U.S. will become less involved in their area. From China's perspective, the start of Trump 2.0 creates many challenges to China's bilateral relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, in the long term, the U.S. reduced commitment to the global South could speed up China's expectation of global trends, which is mean rising East and shrinking West. So I hope that the Trump 2.0 remaining the presence and strengthen the presence in the global South.
We've been talking with Masaaki Yatsuzuka, who's a senior research fellow at the China Division of the Regional Studies Department at NIDS, the National Institute for Defense Studies in Japan. And Mr. Yatsuzuka is the co-author of a recently published report, which we've been discussing, The Rising Global South and China. So thanks so much for joining us, Masaaki-san.
Thank you very much, Bonnie-san.